Thinking in English. Well, how can we do it? Is it possible? Is it really a thing? Well, what's up about it? Let's discuss a little bit of thinking in English. Hello, everybody. My name is Teacher Leo. You know me. If you don't know me, go take a look at some other videos. Videos here, there, videos everywhere. So, but we are going to basically concentrate and focus this video in particular talking about thinking in English. So one of my previous videos, we talked about what does it mean to think and what does it mean to think in English. And we also remember that we established that there are some cognitive skills, so some things that we can do with our thinking process that they're not really attached to language. We can basically use our senses and analyze what we have in front of us to make those types of decisions. We talked about how we can learn those new skills. We can identify and reproduce patterns. We talked about how we can make decisions, we can make plans, and we can also can create associations of cause and effect. All of those are cognitive skills that they are not necessarily attached to language. But here's what happens. We are born. We grow up. There's language around us. Our parents or our family or the community around us, they basically they encourage us to basically start repeating words, talking, and all of that. Suddenly, we start to notice that the way that we think basically starts to create a little bit of our voice in our heads. So when we are trying to solve a problem, for example, we can have two types of approach, right? We can just start speaking to ourselves using our voices out loud, or we can start kind of mentalizing that information and process it without verbalizing it so nobody can hear. But what happens is that we kind of start hearing a voice in our minds. Some people start to notice that if they record themselves, if they listen to the recording, they will feel that the voice that they hear is not really the voice that they hear in their heads when they're speaking. And for many people, this is just like natural part of the process. It's just what happens with us. And if we are basically learning another language, it becomes very difficult. Or we basically don't really believe that it is possible for you to create that voice, but in the language that you're trying to speak. And in this case, we're talking about English as a second language. So what happens here is that it is possible and it is recommended for you to train that part of your brain to be thinking in English. That can help you in all communication situations. It will help you stop translating it in your head. So all of those things are going to be pretty important if you're considering living in an English speaking country, for example. So what is that? How does it happen? How can we train our brains to think in English? Let's take a look.
Authentic and natural English.
So there are some different types of ways that we have to call these voice in our heads. Some people will call it internal monologue. Some people will call it inner speech. But basically, it is the fact that while we're processing information, we kind of hear our thought process in our heads, and it sounds like a voice to us. That voice tends to be different from the voice that we usually use. If we record our voices and we listen to it, we find some kind of dissonance, a little bit of a difference between those two. But let's imagine you go to the supermarket, you have two packages of two different brands of pasta, and you're looking at them and you say, hey, this is cheaper, but I like the taste of this one a little bit more, and none of that you are doing verbally. You're just mentalizing that information, the dialogue as you go through, pondering between the choice, basically the two options that you have in front of you. And what I have here, what I find interesting, there's this game called the Talus Principle 2. The story basically, you are built as a robot, you are the number 1,000, and there's something special about you. So you basically start, you don't have much, but basically have some out of the robots talking to you. And finally, you meet this merchant. And this merchant has some strange options of things that you can purchase. One of them is the internal monologue. So let's see what happens when this character that you play as basically starts developing and pays attention to their internal monologue or their inner speech. Let's take a look at the clip.
That one comes with the following disclaimer. Internal monologue was discontinued as a default feature in new builds. Constant self-commentary is not recommended for all customers. But I can switch yours on for 10 credits if you're sure you want it. As you wish. I'm uploading the new settings now. Do you hear anything?
Why is she staring at me? I don't hear anything. I'm not sure this is working. Wait, no. This is new. I didn't used to think in words like this. It's like there's this little translator turning all my thoughts into some kind of ongoing narrative. It's kind of relentless. How do you make it stop? Do I just not think? I'll try that. Is it working? No! Still describing everything in words. This is starting to be...
A bit overwhelming, isn't it? I turned mine off long ago, but some of the older folk learned to live with it. Sure you want it? That's fortunate. Because we couldn't pull that thing out of you without taking half of you with it. It'll mostly run in the background. Just don't think about it too hard.
Wait, is this internal monologue me? Or some kind of virus? Am I a life form which learned to describe itself? Or a parasite which survives by providing a narrative service to its host? Hold on, she's going to say something else.
So, something else perhaps?
So we can see what inner speech is and how it manifests. Now, what is the connection between inner speech and speaking different languages? Well, the most important component here is that you should be thinking in your target language. So let's imagine that I am in Japan, I know how to speak Japanese, so I should be focusing my thinking, so I'm thinking in Japanese. If I'm in Brazil, I'm going to focus and mentalize and using my speech, my inner speech as Brazilian Portuguese. So right now I'm in Canada, which means that it's important for me to be able to develop my inner speech in English. This means that I'm going to be thinking in English whenever I have communication or a social situation in front of me. It will help me be more present. It will help me basically also avoid the idea of code switching. We can think about the languages that we speak almost like operating systems that we have in our brain. And if I have to constantly shift from Brazilian Portuguese to English, I'm going to be in my head quite a lot. I'm not going to be able to be present. I'm not going to be able to interact with people in front of me. So it's important that while I'm functioning, all those language parts, they're all functioning in English. So how do we develop that? Before we give you some of the tips, that's the number one issue that I find with people who are learning to speak English as a second language. So the idea of reading. In this particular case, what I'm referring to, for example, I have a lot of students from Brazil, and let's imagine that this person, they went to university and they were in university for a master's degree, for example. During the master's degree, you will be required to read some articles in English. So what do? You grab the text, you take a look at them, and this is when we have different types of reading that happens. First off, it's very important. So when we are reading in our languages, and if we have experience with that, we are going to have that inner speech in that language. But let's imagine you're not really experienced with the English language. What you are going to do is that you're going to rely on the spelling, on the code that you see to guess the meaning of those words. So being able to read, being able to identify information. So if I have a word, for example, like population, just how the word is written is going to give me tips, and I'm going to use my cognitive processes, my cognitive abilities to say, hey, population, população, which is my first language, it's like, oh, okay, so they're basically kind of the same. I can associate meaning. But does that mean that I know the language? Actually, the answer is no. Why? Well, another thing that we discussed in some of our previous videos is that language, when it comes to language, speaking comes before writing and reading. You first learn to speak, and then you learn how to read and write after. So it's important for you to be able to associate sound with everything that you see on paper. So if you read and you concentrate on basically guessing the sounds of what you see on the page, but then your brain's telling you that you understand because you have seen those constructions, you've seen that before, so you are able to decode information, but you're not really able to read the language. And basically, when we're talking about reading the language and functioning in that language, we're talking about making sure that our inner speech, the way that that voice happens in our minds, it is accurate and reflective of the language that you're trying to speak. So if I get a text, so let me get an example here for us. So what I have here is basically the first paragraph of extremely loud and incredibly close. This is the adaptive version. So this is a reader, a graded one. So let's imagine that I look at this and I can identify some of the words because I know some English. For example is something that I see. But then when I look at that, when I look at the words and I'm mentalizing the sounds, what I mentalize is something like this. Clique, to invente things, for example, watch if a kettle had a spot that she. So if I have these sounds in my head, basically I'm using the logic of my first language in terms of sounds, and I'm trying to apply to what I see. So even though I may understand the meaning of the words here, I don't really have an accurate representation of the inner speech of that language. So this is one thing that is super important for people who tend to say things like, I can read, but I cannot speak. Because a lot of times when they are thinking about speaking in the English sounds, they're not really thinking about the English sounds. They're putting the logic of the sounds of their first language and trying to apply it to the target language that they have. So it is extremely important for you to kind of detach the idea of looking at words in the paper and feel that you are able to read. Because remember, language is sound first. So how can we, number one, avoid this kind of pitfall, I would say, or this challenge that many speakers of English that as a second language will face, and how is it that you can build an accurate inner speech and then think in English and stop translating? Let's take a look at some tips. So first thing that we need to do if we want to start building an accurate representation of what English sounds like is for us to listen at the same time that we read. So if by any chance you're going to purchase the book and you're going to read the book, try to find the same book as an audiobook so you can have both of them at the same time. I am going to put some of resources that I have found on the internet. They're all free, easy for you to access, but they basically do the same thing. For example, the book Alice Adventures in Wonderland. So basically you are able to read the book and also have an audiobook, which means that whenever you're doing that and you're repeating those sounds, you're going to be building a more accurate representation of the inner speech. So the second one, if you are not necessarily still in the process of learning how to deal with books and get acquainted and enjoy the like reading overall, is to use this with music, reading lyrics and following the lyrics with the song. This basically can be preferable for many people because short songs are usually shorter. So you can basically take a look at the lyrics of the song that you like, take a look at the song, listen and read at the same time, and then basically you're going to be, again, building a more accurate representation of what inner speech should sound like in your head. But now, how do you start building this for yourself? So let's take a look at some things that you can do. So it's important for you to get started with simple phrases, potentially narrating things that you are doing as you go. So if you are, you wake up, and usually what I particularly like to do whenever I'm taking a shower or I'm making my coffee, I like to go over the things that I want to get accomplished that day. So you can use that as future with will, future with going to. You can use it present simple if you use the verb need, for example. So just making coffee and think, oh, I need to send that email today. Today, I am going to write a YouTube video script. So all of those are things that I do. I plan my day. I can narrate something that is happening right in front of me. Like right now, I'm drinking my coffee. And you can repeat those words in your mind without verbalizing them, but then have a clear kind of representation of those sounds in your brain while you are doing them. I think that one of the ones that I like the most is really about planning the day. And also when I'm thinking about, and this depending on your knowledge of grammar, we'll be talking about grammar in a video very soon. But depending on your knowledge of grammar, you can change things. For example, if you did something the day before, you could think about different possibilities for that outcome. So you can practice third conditional, for example, and you say, oh, if I had basically if I had breakfast earlier, I would have been able to have lunch later. I don't know, I'm just going with it. But basically, you can start practicing doing those types of sentences in your head, not verbalizing them. You can start with very simple sentences. I'm brushing my teeth. And you keep repeating that in your mind as you're doing it. And then you can move on to something that is a little bit more complex, talking about planning your day. And then you can talk about potential things something that happened in the past and you were thinking about different outcomes to that. You can narrate a story in your head. So if you watch a movie and then you want to kind of do a summary or a recap of the movie, but you don't want to do it verbally, you can just think about it. And one way that we would have is to also do handwriting, because as you do handwriting, and then again, you can do it anything. You can do a little bit of a journal. While you are journaling and while you are writing, you are basically mentalizing the sounds of the words that you are putting down on the paper. It's important for you not to just try to keep planning what you are going to write after, but be present at that particular moment and write down and really mentalize the sounds as you write them down. So let's see here, just going over my notes because I have notes. So yeah, basically start with simple tenses. Make sure that when we're talking about the writing part, making sure that you practice handwriting. Handwriting is so important for us to be able to practice basically mindfulness, being present, making sure that we're connecting with the words that we're putting down on the paper. Typing doesn't really do that for us as much, especially because typing happens a lot faster than handwriting does. So handwriting does require a little bit more attention for us to do. So I highly recommend focusing on that. And then of course, don't forget that we talked about the idea of basically having every time that you have basically a text that you're going to read, to also have the audio version of that. It's easy for us to do that today with websites like news websites. A lot of them, they have the article read, so you have the audio file at the same time they have the writing there. So I highly recommend working with those. And then of course, one of the most important ones for us, playing video games. Play video games, folks, in terms of developing inner speech. And in this particular case, mostly talking about the idea that a lot of problem solving. So I'm going to be recommending specifically puzzle games for this one. So there are some puzzle games that I like to recommend when it comes to the idea of thinking in English and learning how to build inner speech in that particular case. In the first game, I'll put, if you're familiar with this game, there you are trying to solve puzzles, and you have like this robot kind of roasting you all along. But the first game that I like to recommend if you want to practice inner speech is the game Portal. If you're familiar with that, basically you have this machine and you can have a blue portal here, an orange portal there, and those are now connected. So basically you have to use that for you to be able to transverse or to go from one point to another. Maybe sometimes you have to throw a cube and things like that. So that's a great example. The second one that I want to recommend is a game called Humanity. So Humanity, basically, kind of in terms of concept, is similar to Portal in a way that you have point A and point B, but basically you have a flow of people and you have to put commands on a board in a way that you have that flow of people go from point A to point B, and they get progressively more difficult. Of course, I already spoke about this game. The Talus Principle 1 and 2, also great games for that. And you also have the classic one, the one that really started with the process of, thinking in English, developing inner speech, and making sure that you're using that to problem solve as well, which is the one that you have the wolf, the cabbage, and the sheep, that you are on the boat, and you have to transfer all the three of them to the other side, keeping in mind that you cannot leave by themselves the wolf and the sheep and the cabbage. And you can only carry one of those to the other side at a time. So it's something that basically is a problem right in front of you. It's a logic problem in front of you. And basically what you're trying to do is that you're trying to solve that in your mind, not verbalizing it, and you're doing it all in English. So you can do that, but it's important that, remember, number one, when you are doing that in your mind, that sound in your mind of your inner speech is an accurate representation of the language. And if you want to do that, every time that you do reading, you're doing listening as well. Okay? Once you do that, once you feel, let's imagine that I'm working with Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. So the first time that I read it, I'm going to, or the first chapters, you can do a gradual process with that. So the first 3 chapters, you are going to read the book with the audiobook. And then 1 chapter, you are going to just read it without the audio because you're trying to reproduce some of the sounds that you've been listening to. Then you have 1 more chapter, the other chapter, you do it with the, you have the book and you have the audio. The following chapter, you don't have the audio, but you try to practice inner speech by yourself. So in that particular case, the first one is a super guided moment for the inner speech. You're basically trying to build a database of sounds as you hear. The second one is when you try to kind of put a little bit of the wheels like a bicycle on the side. You just recently heard all of those words, and now you're trying to repeat them. You're trying to reproduce them. And then, of course, that you could potentially just read the same chapter twice, first time with no sounds, second times with sounds. So you can think, oh, a lot of the sounds that I actually predicted them correctly. And then finally, you can then going a little bit more independent when you are reading and you are reading with no audio because you have good experience and you understand that what you read and then the inner speech is basically accurately representative of what English sounds. After that, so we go from a non-guided process that you're basically trying to reproduce to a moment that is a little bit more your own. So in that particular case, you are going over your daily routine, thinking about what your plans for the next hours are. You're thinking about or contemplating how the past could have been different, plans for the future, things that you are doing at that particular moment. So in that case, you are fostering inner speech for your day-to-day activities. You can start writing down and doing journaling. So every time that you do handwriting, you're actually going to be engaging with your inner speech as well. Finally, the last one is when you're trying to do problem solving at difficult tasks. So in that particular case, I highly, highly recommend playing puzzle games like Portal, Humanity, Talus Principle 1 and 2, Trine as well. There are many others. Like there's so many that you can find, but I just wanted to give you some of those examples here. So following these steps, this is how you're going to be developing your inner speech, and you're going to learn how to think in English. It's a very, very important component of our development and thinking about speaking in English as a second language, and that's our first step for these fluency talks. Next time, we're going to be talking about grammar and how our understanding of grammar can help with the process of thinking in English. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. And this was Teacher Leo from Second Nature English. See you, everybody. Thank you for watching.